Hi. I've tried to record this 7 times, so let's see what happens this time. Um, I think this episode exists because of a question or request. I think request is more of what it was. That showed up in the Discord and refused to stay small in my head because not a lot of things do. They're like those rubber dinosaurs that you put in water and they get huge. I don't know, it's an old people toy, so maybe you don't know about it. Um, Someone asked about Metacomputics, shout out JP, which, when he asked, it already told me that either he trusts me too much or wanted to see how far I'd wander before I circled back with a thought that felt familiar but was harder to pin down. If you've never heard the word before, that's fine. If you've heard it before and feel confident about it, that's also fine. I think words like this tend to feel solid right up until you sit with them for a while and start thinking about them. Metacomputics, in my plain terms, is computation paying attention to itself. Systems that don't just process the information, but observe how they process it, refine that process, and repeat the cycle. It's like a thought with a feedback loop. It's an analysis that keeps improving its own analysis. I think maybe that sounds technical, and it kind of is. But the part that matters is that this way of operating didn't just stay inside machines. We built it and we learned from it, and then we started living inside it. Recommendation systems started adjusting recommendation systems. Platforms started refining engagement based on earlier refinements. And metrics, of course. Metrics tracking metrics until the tracking itself became the objective. Over time, meaning seems to have become something manageable, something cleaner, and that doesn't require anyone to sit with uncertainty for very long. I think the power of Metacomputics doesn't really stand out to me. The thing that stands out is its composure. It doesn't really ask for agreement or for you to believe it. It just keeps going. And eventually it reaches a point where human participation becomes completely optional. It's not that we disappear, but our role definitely changes. It seems like presence is replaced by inputs, and patterns stand in for our intention. Interior life stops being necessary. It seems like a system like this can operate indefinitely without caring whether anyone feels anything while it does so. And as far as I know, humans don't work like that. We hesitate and second guess ourselves, like I am right now. We feel drawn toward things we can't fully explain, like me talking to this camera. And we seem to experience wanting and resistance at the same time. A system like the one we're talking about can predict your behavior with remarkable accuracy, which is why so many people think their phones are reading their minds. But I don't think they experience the tension of choosing. As metacomputational thinking spreads, recursion becomes the environment. Thought examining thought, meaning refining meaning, attention watching itself be redirected and mistaking that awareness for depth. And you can live here. A lot of people do, including me at times. It feels articulate, elevated, and at times even like insight. But I think there's something else that happens here too. The witnesses seem to fade. Grief loses its shape. Reverence loses its weight. Presence thins out. And what's left is, I guess, movement. And before I keep going, I want to slow the pace for a second, even though I talk so slowly that I have to edit these at 2x because listening to myself makes me feel insane. I don't know why I talk like this. I assure you I'm not high. I wish I was. Episodes like this tend to collect assumptions as they go, and I feel like it helps to clear some of them before they harden. When people hear language about systems, abstraction, recursion, and technology, including me, a few conclusions tend to appear automatically. And they're understandable conclusions, but they don't line up with what my actual thoughts are. I think this talk sits comfortably next to technology, like an old friend. Obviously, these systems exist. I use them. They're part of where I'm talking from right now, not something I'm observing from a distance. And the same goes for thinking deeply. Reflection, analysis, and curiosity are just parts of how we orient ourselves. The tension I feel like I'm circling isn't really about depth disappearing. I think it's about how easily depth turns into motion without arrival, which is kind of the story of my life. I love thinking, and I love other people who think. I appreciate the human ability to think, whatever the idea. Thinking can expand awareness, but I feel like at times, especially in my life, it becomes a substitute for actually being in an experience, for inhabiting it. I feel like meaning is alive in this conversation. Purpose too, whatever that might be. And structure does show up everywhere. I think the thing missing from systems like these isn't meaning. I think it's the ability to hold it without translating it into something measurable. Meaning doesn't seem to arrive as a finished object or product. It seems to show up gradually, unevenly, and usually without instructions. And it definitely doesn't like being standardized. We can share experiences, we can trade language, and we definitely seem to learn from each other. But interior life still unfolds privately. And again, I'm not speaking from outside of this. I'm inside the loops I'm describing right now. I benefit from the systems, and I get distracted by them. I mistake cleverness for clarity almost daily. And as much as I wish it was, this episode isn't meant as a conclusion on the subject. I think it's more of a pause, because when I started writing my ideas down, I could feel myself sliding into the same recursive pattern, explaining, refining, stepping back to comment on the explanation. The structure might have been getting cleaner, but the feeling underneath was thinning out. And I messaged my friend Z about this, and after reading what I said, he said something really simple. Don't get lost in the recursion. Which again, like most things he says, hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't just dismissing my thoughts or the idea for this episode. He was just pointing at a limit he'd run into himself. He told me he'd followed that same path years earlier. He mentioned blog posts and pieces of writing from 2025 that lived almost entirely in that space. He said there was a moment when he noticed what was happening and stopped. I think that moment mattered more than the theory itself. Z said that when he tries to slow the loop, he asks himself a question. What's life for? Sometimes that question opens another loop. Sometimes it doesn't. Either way, it interrupts the momentum. And sometimes, most of the time, I misunderstand everything everyone's saying. But I think he framed it like this. Life arriving without a manual could be understood in two ways. Either something is missing, or nothing ever was. If a manual is assumed to exist, then it makes sense to search for it, to collect perspectives, to compare experiences, to refine frameworks. Over time, there's this kind of shared approximation that starts to form. To me, it seems like Metacomputics thrive here, in continuous improvement, in endless refinement, always one more layer away from resolution. On the other hand, if no manual is assumed, then life unfolds differently. Action doesn't wait for clarity. Meaning doesn't arrive fully formed. And responsibility stays localized. That framing, whether accurate or not, stayed with me. For me, the absence of a manual sharpens my attention. It keeps experience from being outsourced, and it makes choices feel heavier and more intimate. Even like me recording this, we can point toward meaning, and we can witness each other. We can share drafts of how things feel, but you still have to give attention. I think that's where these systems fall short. They can track attention, shape it, redirect it, and monetize it, but they can't offer it freely. Attention given without an audience, without metrics, without optimization, I think that's where meaning still shows up. So yes, this episode exists because someone in the Discord asked a question about my thoughts on metacomputing. Also because Z slowed me down, and because this pattern feels increasingly present while being something we don't really name or talk about. I think you should explore ideas, wander, and let recursion do its work. I just hope you don't confuse movement with home, like I do. However, if you find yourself later tonight, or however time works, staring at the ceiling, deep inside a thought spiral, it's okay. Eat something, drink water, take a deep, slow breath. Life seems to continue alongside the thinking. It doesn't wait for conclusions. Bye.